Commander Vex 9 clicked his mandibles in what passed for nervous laughter among his species. Here he was, a decorated Korthani warrior who had survived 3 sector wars, and yet his exoskeleton was practically vibrating with anxiety. Why? Because he was about to witness something that went against every piece of conventional wisdom in the galaxy. A human female serving as a bodyguard. "Are you absolutely certain about this decision, Ambassador Quintal?" Vex asked, his voice carrying that peculiar warble that indicated deep concern among his people. "I mean, no offense to your pet species, but shouldn't we have hired some Gorvak mercenaries instead? Or maybe a squad of titanium-plated Nexari? This is the Council of 14 we're talking about, not some backwater trade dispute." Ambassador Quintal, whose blue-scaled hide shimmered with what Vex had learned to recognize as amusement, simply gestured toward the human female standing at attention near the viewport. "Commander, meet Zara Kane. She comes highly recommended by the Terran Protection Services. Apparently, she has what humans call an impressive resume." Vex looked at the creature in question and had to suppress what would have been considered rude, chittering among polite Korthani society. The human was small, laughably so. She stood barely 2 meters tall, which made her shorter than even the diplomatic staff's youngest intern. Her skin was that peculiar peachy pink color that humans seem to come in, and her hair was tied back in what his translation implant helpfully informed him was called a ponytail. She wore a simple black suit that looked more appropriate for a business meeting than intergalactic warfare. "With all due respect, Ambassador," Vex said, trying to keep the skepticism out of his voice and failing spectacularly, "she looks like she'd have trouble opening a particularly stubborn food container, let alone protecting you from the most dangerous political gathering in known space." Zara Kane turned her head slightly, and Vex caught a glimpse of her eyes. They were brown, a mundane, unremarkable brown that reminded him of fertile soil back on Korthak's prime. But there was something in those eyes that made his survival instincts suddenly perk up and start paying attention. "I can hear you, you know," she said, her voice carrying that flat, matter-of-fact tone that humans seem to excel at. "And for the record, I've opened plenty of stubborn containers in my time, some of them even shot back." The casual way she delivered that line made Vex's primary heart skip a beat. Was that a threat? Or a joke? With humans, it was often impossible to tell the difference. "See?" Quintal said, his scales now practically glowing with mirth. "I told you she was perfect for the job." Perfect for getting them all killed, maybe, Vex thought, but didn't say aloud. Instead, he pulled up her file on his wrist display and began reading through it while trying to maintain his composure. What he saw made his secondary heart start acting up too. Zara Kane, age 32 Terran years, former military specialist in something called close quarters combat, decorated veteran of the Proxima Centauri incident, and currently employed by what appeared to be a very exclusive private security firm. The list of her previous clients read like a who's who of the galaxy's most paranoid and dangerous individuals, all of whom were still breathing. That was, actually, somewhat impressive. "Still," Vex muttered, more to himself than anyone else, "the Council of 14 isn't exactly known for their restraint when it comes to eliminating problems." "What was that?" Zara asked, stepping closer to his position. Vex noticed that, despite her small stature, she moved with a fluidity that reminded him of the apex predators back on his homeworld. "Did you say something about problems?" "I was merely expressing concern about the upcoming negotiations," Vex replied, trying to sound diplomatic. "The hegemony lords have been known to solve disputes through rather direct methods." Zara's mouth curved upward in what Vex's cultural database identified as a smile, though it looked more predatory than friendly. "Oh, I'm counting on it." That response sent a chill down Vex's spinal ridge. Humans, he was beginning to realize, had a very different relationship with danger than most civilized species. While any sane being would try to avoid conflict, humans seem to have this disturbing tendency to run toward it with what could only be described as enthusiasm. The transport ship shuddered slightly as it dropped out of hyperspace, and through the viewport, Vex could see their destination. Station Omega-7, a massive diplomatic complex that floated in neutral space like a metallic monument to galactic cooperation. Or, as Vex preferred to think of it, like a very expensive tomb waiting to be filled. Arrival in 30 minutes, announced the ship's AI in that annoyingly cheerful tone that all transport AIs seem to be programmed with. Please prepare for docking procedures and remember that Station Omega-7 maintains a strict no-weapons policy. Vex saw Zara's smile widen at that announcement, which somehow made him even more nervous. No weapons, he repeated, looking at her with what he hoped was subtle concern. That means no plasma rifles, no molecular disruptors, no gravity hammers. How exactly are you planning to protect the ambassador without any proper equipment? Zara flexed her fingers in a gesture that looked casual, but somehow made Vex want to take a step backward. Who said anything about needing weapons? Before Vex could ask what that meant, the ship's communications system crackled to life with an incoming transmission. The holographic display flickered into existence, revealing the imposing figure of High Chancellor Morvac, leader of the hegemony, and the being who had called this emergency session of the Council of 14. Morvac looked exactly like what Central Casting would order if they needed someone to play an evil galactic overlord. His species, the Drakari, were naturally intimidating. Standing 3 meters tall, with obsidian-black scales, glowing red eyes, and teeth that could punch through starship hull plating. The fact that Morvac wore ceremonial battle armor decorated with the skulls of his enemies didn't exactly help his image as a reasonable negotiator. "Greetings, Ambassador Quintal," Morvac's voice rumbled through the ship's speakers like distant thunder. "I trust your journey has been uneventful." There was something in the way he emphasized that last word that made Vex's danger sensors start flashing metaphorical warning lights. "High Chancellor," Quintal replied with diplomatic smoothness. "Thank you for arranging this meeting. The Corthani Republic is always ready to participate in constructive dialogue." Morvac's laugh was the sound of starship hulls being torn apart. "Oh, there will definitely be construction involved, Ambassador. We're going to be building a new galactic order, and I do hope you'll choose to be part of the Foundation rather than disposed of with the rubble." Vex felt his mandibles clench involuntarily. That wasn't diplomacy. That was a barely veiled threat, delivered with all the subtlety of a meteor impact. "I look forward to hearing your proposals," Quintal said, maintaining his diplomatic tone despite the obvious menace in Morvac's words. "Excellent. I'll see you in the main conference chamber in 1 hour." "Oh, and Ambassador?" Morvac's red eyes seemed to focus directly on the camera. "I do hope you haven't brought any unnecessary security personnel. This is meant to be a peaceful gathering of civilized leaders. After all." The transmission cut off, leaving the three of them in uncomfortable silence. "Well," Vex said finally, "that wasn't ominous at all." Zara, who had been listening to the entire exchange with what appeared to be mild interest, simply nodded. "Yep, he's definitely planning to kill you all." "What?" Vex's voice cracked in a way that would have been embarrassing under normal circumstances. "Oh, come on," Zara said, looking at him like he'd just failed a basic intelligence test. "Did you miss the part where he practically announced his plans to commit mass murder? The only question is whether he's going to do it during the opening ceremonies or wait until dessert." Ambassador Quintal's scales had lost their amused shimmer and were now displaying what Vex recognized as color pattern for deep concern. "Miss Kane, are you suggesting that the High Chancellor intends to eliminate the other council members?" "I'm not suggesting anything," Zara replied. "I'm stating it as fact. That wasn't a diplomatic invitation. That was a villain monologue, delivered with all the finesse of a sledgehammer to the face. If this were a human entertainment program, Ominous music would be playing right about now. Vex looked back and forth between the human and his ambassador, trying to process what he was hearing. But that's impossible. The Council of 14 has been meeting for over 2 centuries. There are protocols, agreements, safeguards, all of which become remarkably ineffective when someone decides to ignore them, Zara pointed out. And judging by our friend's performance just now, he's not particularly concerned about following traditional diplomatic procedures. The ship shuddered again as the docking clamps engaged, and Vex realized with growing dread that they were now committed to this course of action. They were about to walk into what was very likely a trap, protected only by a small human female who seemed to view the entire situation as some sort of amusing challenge. "So what do we do?" he asked, hating how his voice came out as barely more than a whisper. Zara checked something on a small device attached to her wrist. Vex's scanners couldn't identify what it was, which was somehow even more unsettling. "We go to the meeting, smile politely, and wait for the bad guys to make their move. And then?" Her smile returned, and this time Vex was absolutely certain it belonged on the face of a predator. "And then I show them why humans don't make good victims." As they disembarked from their transport and made their way through Station Omega, 7's pristine corridors, Vex couldn't help but notice how the other diplomatic parties were arranged. Every single delegation had brought multiple bodyguards, towering Gorvak warriors, sleek Nexari assassins, even a few of the legendary Vorthak death dealers. The corridors looked like a convention of the galaxy's most dangerous beings. And then there was their group. One nervous Korthani commander, one increasingly worried ambassador, and one human female who looked like she was on her way to a business lunch rather than a potential massacre. "This is insane," Vex muttered as they approached the main conference chamber. "We're going to die, and the last thing I'll see is that human's inexplicable confidence." "Hey," Zara said, falling into step beside him, "look on the bright side." "There's a bright side to imminent death?" "Sure. If I'm wrong about all this, you get to spend the rest of your life telling everyone about the time you worried for nothing. And if I'm right," she shrugged casually, "well, it's going to be one hell of a show." The massive doors to the conference chamber slid open with a sound like fate being sealed, and Vex got his first look at what was very likely going to be his tomb. The chamber was circular, with 14 seats arranged around a central holographic display. Representatives from 13 different species were already seated, each flanked by their chosen protectors. All eyes turned toward their small group as they entered, and Vex could practically feel the mixture of confusion and contempt directed at their human bodyguard. A few of the other delegates actually laughed, actual audible laughter, at the sight of Zara Kane. High Chancellor Morvac stood at the head of the circular table, his massive frame casting shadows across the polished floor. "Ah, Ambassador Quintal, so good of you to join us. And you brought." His glowing red eyes fixed on Zara with obvious disdain. "What exactly is that supposed to be?" "My security consultant," Quintal replied smoothly. More laughter rippled around the chamber. One of the hegemony representatives, a particularly ugly Drakari with battle scars covering his scales, leaned forward in his seat. "Security? That little thing couldn't secure a food storage container, let alone protect anyone from serious threats." Vex noticed that Zara didn't react to the insults with anger or defensiveness. Instead, she seemed to be studying the room with the focused attention of someone conducting a very important inventory. Her brown eyes moved systematically from delegate to delegate, bodyguard to bodyguard, noting positions, distances, and potential threats with professional detachment. "Please, take your seats," Morvac said, gesturing toward the 3 empty chairs designated for their delegation. "We have so much to discuss, and I'm afraid time may be shorter than expected." As they settled into their positions, Vex couldn't shake the feeling that they had just walked into a carefully prepared trap. The other delegation's bodyguards were all positioned strategically around the chamber, creating what looked suspiciously like a perimeter designed to prevent escape rather than provide protection. "Now then," Morvac continued, his voice carrying easily through the chamber's acoustics, "I've called this emergency session to address a matter of utmost importance to the future of galactic civilization. The current system of governance has become inefficient." "Inefficient how?" asked Ambassador Kreldar of the Zinthari Collective, her crystalline voice ringing with suspicion. Morvac's smile revealed teeth that could have served as ship-cutting tools. Too many voices, too many opinions, too much unnecessary debate. What the galaxy needs is strong, decisive leadership, unity of purpose, a single voice speaking with absolute authority. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees as the implications of his words sank in. "You're talking about dissolving the council," said Chancellor Vrimtalk of the Outer Rim territories, his tentacles writhing with agitation. "That would be a violation of every treaty and agreement that has kept the peace for the past 2 centuries. "Treaties," Morvac repeated, as if the word tasted unpleasant. "Agreements. Pieces of paper signed by beings who are no longer in power, governing a galaxy that no longer exists. The old order is dying, my friends. The only question is whether you choose to be part of the new one, or whether you choose to die with the old." That wasn't subtle. That wasn't even close to subtle. That was a declaration of war delivered with all the diplomatic finesse of a plasma cannon to the face. Vex looked around the chamber and saw his own alarm reflected in the faces of the other delegates. This wasn't a negotiation. It was an ultimatum delivered at what was very likely an execution. "And if we refuse?" asked Ambassador Quintal, maintaining his composure despite the obvious threat. Morvac's laugh filled the chamber like the sound of worlds burning. "Oh, my dear Ambassador, you're not going to refuse." That's when Vex noticed that all of the hegemony bodyguards had quietly moved to new positions, effectively surrounding the seated delegates. The trap was springing, and they were all caught in the middle of it. "You see," Morvac continued, clearly enjoying his moment of triumph, "I've taken the liberty of ensuring that this vote will be unanimous. My associates here will be happy to help any delegates who might be struggling with their decision." The hegemony soldiers began reaching for their weapons, and Vex realized with crystalline clarity that they were about to witness the end of galactic democracy, probably followed immediately by the end of their own lives. That's when he heard something that would haunt his dreams for the rest of his very likely brief existence. The sound of a human female beginning to laugh. Not nervous laughter, not panicked laughter. The kind of laughter that suggested someone had just heard the most amusing joke in the universe. "Oh, this is perfect," Zara said, standing up from her chair with casual ease. "I was wondering when you were going to drop the pretense." Every eye in the chamber turned toward her, and Vex could see confusion replacing confidence on more than a few faces. This wasn't how victims were supposed to react. "I'm sorry," Morvac said, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. "Did you find something amusing about my proposal?" "Your proposal?" "No, that's just standard megalomaniac nonsense," Zara replied, brushing invisible dust off her suit jacket. "What I find funny is that you actually think this is going to work." The silence in the chamber was so complete that Vex could hear his own hearts beating. "I have 40 armed soldiers positioned throughout this station," Morvac said slowly. "Every exit is blocked, every escape route is monitored, and every one of you is completely at my mercy. Please explain to me how this isn't going to work." Zara's smile widened, and for the first time since meeting her, Vex understood why humans had managed to survive as a species despite being such physically unremarkable creatures. "Well," she said, cracking her knuckles in a gesture that somehow sounded like a promise of violence, "you made one tiny mistake in your planning." "And what was that?" "You let a human into the room." What happened next would go down in galactic history as either the most spectacular rescue operation ever recorded, or the most terrifying display of human combat capability that anyone had ever witnessed. Vex was still trying to decide which category it fell into when Zara Kane transformed from a mild-mannered bodyguard into something that his nightmares would be featuring for years to come. The transformation didn't involve any dramatic costume changes or mystical energy fields. One moment she was standing there looking like an accountant who had wandered into the wrong meeting, and the next moment she was moving with a speed and precision that defied every law of physics that Vex thought he understood. The first hegemony soldier to reach for his weapon never got the chance to draw it. Zara covered the distance between them in what seemed like a single fluid motion, and suddenly the 3-meter-tall Drakari warrior was flying backward through the air like he'd been launched from a catapult. The sound he made when he hit the chamber wall was somewhere between a crash and a splat. "Did she just?" Vex started to say, but the words died in his throat as Zara spun around to face the next closest threat. The second soldier actually managed to get his plasma rifle halfway out of its holster before Zara's fist connected with his solar plexus. The impact made a sound like a starship hull being breached, and the soldier folded in half before collapsing to the floor in a heap that strongly resembled a pile of discarded armor. "Impossible," Morvac snarled, his red eyes blazing with fury and disbelief. "She's just one small human." "Yeah," Zara replied conversationally while dodging a plasma bolt that came close enough to singe her hair. "But I'm a really annoyed small human, and trust me, that makes all the difference." The third soldier tried to be clever about it. Instead of charging straight at her, he attempted to flank around the conference table to get a better angle for his shot. Zara watched him position himself with the kind of patient interest that a scientist might show while observing an particularly stupid laboratory specimen. When he finally pulled the trigger, Zara wasn't there anymore. She had somehow rolled under the conference table, emerged on the other side, and was now standing directly behind him, with her hand resting casually on his shoulder. "Excuse me," she said politely, "but you're in my way." What she did next violated so many principles of physics that Vex's brain simply refused to process it properly. The soldier, who easily outweighed Zara by a factor of 4 and stood twice as tall, went sailing through the air in a graceful arc that ended when he crashed into 2 of his colleagues, with enough force to send all 3 of them tumbling across the floor like discarded toys. "This is impossible," Ambassador Kreldar whispered, her crystalline voice barely audible above the sounds of combat. "Humans aren't supposed to be capable of this." "Tell that to the guys getting their scales handed to them," Vex replied, unable to tear his eyes away from the ongoing spectacle. By now, the remaining hegemony soldiers had realized that their standard tactics weren't working and had shifted to a more coordinated approach. They began moving in formation, trying to surround Zara and overwhelm her with sheer numbers. It was a sound strategy that had worked against countless opponents throughout galactic history. Unfortunately for them, Zara Kane wasn't most opponents. She moved through their formation like water flowing around stones, except if water could punch holes through starship armor and leave trained killers wondering what had just hit them. Every attempt to pin her down resulted in another soldier joining the growing collection of unconscious bodies scattered around the chamber. "How is she doing that?" demanded Chancellor Vrimtok, his tentacles writhing with agitation. "She's not even using any weapons." "Who needs weapons when you are the weapon?" Zara called out cheerfully while simultaneously kicking one soldier in the chest and elbowing another in what Vex's anatomy scans suggested were very sensitive areas. The most disturbing part, from Vex's perspective, wasn't the casual way she was dismantling what should have been an overwhelming force of elite warriors. It was the fact that she was clearly enjoying herself. Every punch, every kick, every impossible feat of acrobatic combat prowess was delivered with the enthusiasm of someone who had finally found a hobby they were passionate about. High Chancellor Morvac, meanwhile, was rapidly losing what remained of his composure. His carefully planned coup was falling apart in the most humiliating way possible, and the being responsible for it was a creature that barely reached his chest and looked like she should be working in an office somewhere. "Kill her!" he roared at his remaining soldiers. "I don't care what it takes. Bring down the entire station if you have to." "Oh, now you're just being dramatic," Zara said, pausing in her systematic destruction of his forces to give him a disapproving look. "Nobody's bringing down anything. This is a precision operation, not a demolition party." To prove her point, she grabbed the nearest soldier by his weapon harness and used him as a battering ram to clear a path through his colleagues. The resulting domino effect was both mathematically impressive and aesthetically pleasing, at least from an artistic standpoint. "Besides," she continued, while stepping delicately over the groaning bodies, "I'm having way too much fun to let this end quickly." That statement sent a chill down Vex's spinal column that had nothing to do with the station's climate control system. The idea that this level of violence was considered entertainment by human standards was more terrifying than any weapon he'd ever encountered. The last group of soldiers tried a different approach. Instead of attacking Zara directly, they moved to threaten the delegates, clearly, hoping that she would surrender to protect the people she was supposed to be guarding. It was, Vex realized later, possibly the worst tactical decision in recorded military history. Zara's expression changed from playful enjoyment to something that made Vex's survival instincts start screaming at him to find the nearest exit and use it immediately. Her brown eyes went flat and cold, and when she spoke, her voice carried the kind of quiet menace that suggested someone was about to have a very bad day. "Now you've gone and made me angry," she said softly. What happened next was less like combat and more like a natural disaster with a human face. Zara moved through the remaining soldiers with mechanical precision, each strike calculated to neutralize threats while avoiding any damage to the delegates or the station's critical systems. The soldiers' armor, which was designed to withstand plasma fire and molecular disruptors, proved remarkably ineffective against whatever human fighting techniques Zara was employing. "This is incredible," Ambassador Quintal whispered to Vex. "I knew humans were supposed to be adaptable, but this is beyond anything in the intelligence reports." "Intelligence reports," Vex repeated numbly. "Right. I don't suppose any of those reports mentioned that humans can apparently violate the laws of physics when they're sufficiently motivated?" "Oddly enough, no. That seems to have been omitted from the official documentation." By the time the dust settled, literally and figuratively, the conference chamber looked like a tornado had passed through it. 43 elite hegemony soldiers lay scattered across the floor in various states of unconsciousness and regret. The conference table was somehow still intact, though it now had several boot prints on its surface that suggested Zara had used it as a springboard at least once during the proceedings. High Chancellor Morvac stood alone in the center of the chamber, his red eyes darting frantically between the unconscious forms of his soldiers and the small human female who was calmly straightening her suit jacket as if she'd just finished a particularly vigorous workout. "This isn't over," he snarled, though his voice lacked the confidence it had held earlier. "The hegemony has fleets, armies, weapons that can crack planets. One human won't be enough to stop what's coming." Zara tilted her head slightly, considering his words with the detached interest of someone evaluating a mildly interesting problem. "You know what the funny thing is about fleets and armies and planet crackers? What? They're all operated by people. And people, as it turns out, tend to get really nervous when word gets around that their supposedly invincible leader got his entire personal guard defeated by a single human in a business suit." She was right, Vex realized. News of this incident would spread throughout the galaxy faster than a hyperspace communication burst. The image of the mighty hegemony brought low by one small human would be impossible to suppress, and impossible for Morvac's enemies to ignore. "You see," Zara continued, walking casually toward the increasingly agitated Drakari leader, "the thing about ruling through fear and intimidation is that it only works as long as people believe you're invincible. Once that illusion gets shattered, well, Let's just say that tyrants tend to develop a lot of enemies very quickly. Morvac backed away from her, his massive frame somehow seeming smaller than it had at the beginning of the meeting. You don't understand the forces you're dealing with. The hegemony spans dozens of systems. We have resources beyond your comprehension. Had resources? Zara corrected him, past tense. Because I'm willing to bet that by the time news of today's events reaches your home system, you're going to find out just how loyal your subordinates really are when they think you've lost your edge. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the chamber, and Vex looked toward the entrance to see a squad of station security personnel rushing in, their weapons drawn and ready. They took in the scene of devastation with expressions that suggested they were having trouble processing what they were seeing. "Station security," announced their leader, a professional-looking Nexari whose scales were displaying the color patterns for extreme confusion. "We received reports of weapons fire and... What in the name of the eternal void happened here?" "Diplomatic negotiations," Zara replied cheerfully. "They got a little heated." The security chief's scales shifted through several different color combinations as he tried to figure out how to respond to that. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to come with us for questioning. There are protocols for this sort of, whatever this was." "Of course," Zara said, nodding agreeably. "But first, you might want to arrest High Chancellor Morvac for attempted murder, conspiracy to overthrow Galactic government, and making really bad threats that he couldn't back up." "On what grounds?" "Well, there are about 14 witnesses who heard him announce his plans to kill everyone in this room, plus all the unconscious soldiers who were following his orders to commit mass murder. I'd say you've got plenty of grounds." The security chief looked around the chamber again, taking in the scattered bodies, the scorch marks from plasma fire, and the general atmosphere of barely contained chaos. "And you stopped all of this? Alone?" "Hey, I had help," Zara protested, gesturing toward Vex and Ambassador Quintal. "They provided moral support." "Moral support," Vex repeated weakly. "Right. That's exactly what we provided." As station security began the process of arresting Morvac and collecting his unconscious soldiers, Vex found himself standing next to Zara while trying to process everything he had just witnessed. "So," he said eventually, "when you said you had experience with stubborn containers that shot back." "I wasn't kidding," she replied, "though to be fair, most of them put up more of a fight than these guys did." "Most of them?" "Well, you should see what happens when pirates try to hijack a human cargo ship. It's like they've never heard of the concept of angry dock workers before." Vex considered this information and decided that he really didn't want to know what angry human dock workers were capable of. His imagination was already working overtime, and the results weren't good for his mental health. "Miss Kane," Ambassador Quintal said, approaching them with his scales displaying what Vex recognized as profound gratitude. "I believe I owe you an apology, and probably a substantial bonus." "Just doing my job," Zara replied with a shrug. "Though I have to admit, this was more fun than most of my assignments." "More fun," Vex repeated. "You consider this fun?" "Absolutely. It's not often you get to take down a galactic conspiracy and protect democracy all in one afternoon. Plus, I got to work out some stress, which is always good for my mental health." As they prepared to leave the chamber, Vex caught himself looking back at the scene of destruction one more time. In the space of less than an hour, he had witnessed the collapse of what should have been an unstoppable coup, the downfall of one of the galaxy's most feared leaders, and the single most impressive display of combat prowess he had ever seen. And it had all been accomplished by one small human female who looked like she should have been reviewing financial reports instead of dismantling galactic conspiracies. "You know," he said to Zara as they walked toward the exit, "I think I'm beginning to understand why humans have such a reputation in certain circles." "What kind of reputation?" The kind that makes smart people very careful about what they say when humans are listening. Zara laughed, and the sound was considerably fondly more pleasant when it wasn't being delivered in the middle of a combat situation. That's probably wise. We're not really as harmless as we look. No kidding, Vex muttered. As news of the failed coup spread throughout the galaxy, Vex found himself fielding communications from intelligence agencies, military organizations, and diplomatic services that all wanted to know the same thing. Exactly what had happened in that conference chamber, and how one human had managed to single-handedly prevent what should have been the end of galactic democracy. His reports were detailed, accurate, and completely unbelievable to anyone who hadn't been there to witness the events firsthand. The official records would eventually be classified at the highest security levels, not because they contained sensitive information, but because nobody wanted to deal with the panic that would result if the general population found out just how dangerous humans could be when properly motivated. The hegemony, meanwhile, collapsed within a matter of weeks. Just as Zara had predicted, news of Morvac's humiliating defeat had spread throughout their territory faster than their propaganda services could suppress it. Subordinate commanders began declaring independence, rival factions started fighting amongst themselves, and entire fleets defected to other powers rather than serve under a leader who had been defeated by a single unarmed human. Morvac himself was tried and convicted on charges of conspiracy, attempted murder, and what the court records diplomatically referred to as conduct unbecoming a galactic leader. He was sentenced to life imprisonment on a penal colony where, according to the reports Vex received, he spent most of his time insisting that his defeat had been the result of some sort of secret human super-soldier program. Zara Kane, for her part, returned to her normal duties with Terran Protection Services, though her client list suddenly became considerably more exclusive. Apparently, word had gotten around that she was very, very good at her job. So what did we learn from all this? Ambassador Quintal asked Vex during their journey home. Vex considered the question carefully. I learned that intelligence reports about human capabilities are apparently incomplete, that overconfident tyrants make poor strategic decisions, and that I never want to be on the wrong side of a human security consultant. Those are all valuable lessons. What about you? What did you learn? Tal's scales shimmered with what Vex had learned to recognize as deep satisfaction. I learned that sometimes the best way to solve a complex political problem is to hire someone who specializes in simple, direct solutions. Simple and direct, Vex repeated. I'm not sure I'd describe what happened back there as simple. Maybe not simple in execution, but definitely simple in concept. Bad guys threaten innocent people. Good guys stop them. No complicated negotiations, no lengthy diplomatic processes, no political maneuvering, just a straightforward application of superior force delivered with precision and efficiency. Vex thought about that for a moment. You know, when you put it that way, it almost sounds reasonable. Human solutions often do, once you get used to their particular approach to problem solving. As their transport ship entered hyperspace for the journey home, Vex found himself wondering what other surprises humanity might have in store for the galaxy. If one small human female could single-handedly prevent a galactic coup, what might an entire planet full of humans be capable of when they put their minds to it? It was, he decided, probably better not to think about it too hard. Some questions were better left unanswered, especially when the answers might involve concepts like angry human dock workers and superior force delivered with precision and efficiency. Besides, he had reports to write, and he was pretty sure that nobody was going to believe them anyway. The galaxy, he reflected, had just become a much more interesting place to live. Whether that was a good thing or a terrifying thing remained to be seen. But one thing was certain. The next time someone suggested hiring a human bodyguard, he wasn't going to question the decision. He was just going to make sure he stayed on their good side. After all, As he had learned today, it really didn't pay to annoy the humans.